Very excited to chat with you today about AI and where we are today around marketing and how AI is driving innovation for today's B2B CMOs. And as you know, this interview and this conversation we're going to have is really in service of our State of the B2B CMO Report. And without further ado, I think we just get into the conversation.
Let's do it.
I will say, small aside, if we do end up putting this video out there, Noah is one of my favorite people and someone I am constantly impressed by, and someone I look forward to. And I actually, more than just look forward to speaking with, I've manufactured my career and my life to find more moments that I can speak with Noah. And of course, I'm one of his preferred writers for Why Is This Interesting? Okay, so let's jump into this. The promise of AI. Big, hefty promises, both in the terms of energy consumption and financial consumption. What is the reality of AI in the marketing ecosystem today?
Today, capability or possibility? So like on capability, it is very capable of doing almost anything CMO needs it to do. And in fact, I think like sort of the part of the challenge is it's not actually doing it. Like I think a lot of people are not tapping into that capability. They haven't found the sort of best opportunities. I think there's not a clear enough understanding yet of what kind of problems is it particularly good at solving or not. But I think, my overall kind of mental model for, based on a lot of work I've done with brands over the last couple of years is that you can kind of just solve almost anything with a combination of AI, code, and human expertise, right? And I think it's that sort of I called it the holy trinity recently.
Yeah.
But, I think you have to have all those pieces, and when you're missing one of them, which I think a lot of how people think about AI is like, people have seen a demo of AI plus code, and they're like, it writes a bad marketing headline or it writes bad blog post. And it's like, of course it does. Like if it's not working off the sort of unique expertise that sits inside your organization that knows how to do that exceptionally well. But once you start to combine that and build that in and sort of build multi-step workflows, AI just becomes an enabler of, legitimately almost anything. Like I have yet to find a sort of significant problem that a CMO needs to solve that I can't find a solution for. If I have access to somebody who can do it exceptionally well on their own, I have my ability to write code, and I have access to these world-class models.
Mm-hmm. And so when you're looking at the unique challenges of a B2B CMO specifically, and I think I don't want to speak, and I don't want my opinion too heavily in here, but organizations are just starting to find real use cases, right? As opposed to like, oh, this is like a little inspiration, or this helps me, get started. What are the challenges, and are there specific areas in what I would think of as like the B2B CMO journey that you think are the places to get started as far as beginning the process of integrating AI into your organization?
Yeah, it's a little bit hard in that I think it's very organic. It's very dependent on the sort of specific needs of the individuals and the brand. And it's also just important to remember that we're just at the beginning of it all, right? So it's like, I think there's a feeling because of all the noise that we're much further along in this journey, but, we're just at the start. I would say sort of a very simple framework I talk to people about for kind of, before answering the specifics, the sort of generalized approach is like, I think the bottom layer is access, right? Like you've just got to give access to your organization to world-class foundation models, which basically at this moment means sort of access to things like GPT-4 and Claude 3.5. The next level is sort of expertise, which is about helping folks in the organization sort of understand how to best utilize those, choosing a couple key use cases where I think the goal is about sort of not about how do you drive operational efficiency, which is where people start naturally. It's more like how do I take something that a sort of narrow slice or a single person on the team is particularly excellent at, and how do I distribute that excellence throughout the whole organization, right? And I think the way to do that is basically to sort of help those people understand how to build prompts and build GPTs, or Claude calls them projects, that then can be distributed to the organization and sort of allow everybody to operate at their level. And I think the last sort of top of the pyramid is kind of identifying a few really key, highly strategic, high leverage areas where you want to build something sort of more full featured, to solve kind of big, nasty, time consuming,
Hmm.
high leverage problems, right?
And that's where you start to have an impact on an org chart kind of thing. The first one is you just level up expertise across the organization.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can have we're going to start to see an impact on the org chart across the board because I think, like, the very bottom layer, it should sort of increase the, both the efficiency and the effectiveness of folks in the organization. That second layer just raises the bar for everybody, right? I think it is that third layer, though, is where you start to see things like, you know, can you take someone who's really amazing, say, you have a one particularly outstanding writer on the team, right? Who's like able to produce content that sort of goes pretty far beyond what anybody else can handle. And, I do think if you sort of really build around them and build some systems that kind of work in the ways that they work and could deliver at the quality that they deliver, that, the outcome can be that you can amplify the effectiveness of that person by 5 or 10 times, right? And
Wow. Yeah.
that can have, like, that I think will have downstream effects into sizes of the organization and
Totally.
everything else. But the bigger thing, I think, is just amplifying those individuals.
Well, so and you mentioned earlier access, right? That one of the first things to do is give access to the organization. As we've talked, and one of the the sort of mirror challenger is giving access to AI, the knowledge of your organization, right? So it's almost like there's two ways. One is giving access to people to the tools. The other is how do you access your knowledge to create the models that you're discussing? Because as you said, and I don't want to, if you just give access to a Chat GPT or Writer or one of these or Claude, they're not. The output isn't going to be implicitly great. Why would it be? The models are the aggregate of human knowledge. Why would the aggregate of human knowledge implicitly spit out a really good technical thing about about a SaaS company or something, or whatever? How have you seen organizations providing access for those models?
Yeah, I think that's where you just have to sort of narrow it. You have to narrow the problem down, right? So it's like, when I think about that second layer of expertise, sort of identifying a few people, some things they're really good at, and problems that lend themselves to be sort of GPTs, which, if you look at what a GPT or a project from Claude is, effectively it's a prompt and some sort of examples and documents that go along with it.
Mm-hmm.
So in a really narrow way, that's a way you're sort of providing access to the model. It's very narrow access to solve a specific problem. But I think that's a good place to start because I think one of the challenges folks have, honestly, is like, the hardest question I get is like, what are the top 3 use cases? Because there's just not a good answer. It can do anything.
Next
And so I think
question.
you
I'm
really have to,
frantically crossing out my next question.
yeah. And so I think you just kind of have to, like, you have to start with a few and you sort of try to identify them. I think the best kinds of problems to solve with AI tend to be ones where you have the most sort of unique knowledge or point of view. Our friend Jan calls it special knowledge.
Mm.
And I think it's sort of a good way to think about it. Uh, I think on the slightly more tactical side, I was actually just having this conversation this morning with one of the big AI providers. I think one way to help people get started is to actually try to get them to focus on feedback over generation. So like if you're just trying to sort of get it initially rolled out into an organization, I think, the first thing people ask, they're like, I'm going to have it write me an email. And it's like, that sort of sounds like a real problem, but it's like, whatever, writing an email is not
You
actually
can't write
hard.
your own email.
We're sort of all pretty fine. Um, and I have found a much more fruitful way to sort of get people engaged with it is to recommend that they use it for feedback on their own work and their own writing. So it's like,
Mhm.
you take a piece of content, you take a white paper, you take something, and you ask it to sort of like, is everything clear enough in here? Is there anywhere where, I could, include visuals that would help me articulate the point? But like, there's all these kinds of things you can ask it. And one, when you take it out of the realm of being about generation, I think it's just less intimidating to people because it's
Mhm.
like their job is generation
Yeah.
and it's also just great at it. Like it's an infinitely patient reader. And like sometimes it takes some work and it takes some rounds and you got to like work on what to ask it. But when you really get going and you sort of get a feel for it, it can be an amazingly effective. And actually, one of the sort of low hanging fruit use cases I've seen is like trying to recreate the CMO as a bot because like CMO naturally is this huge point of a huge bottleneck in the process, right? And they have a lot of really valuable feedback, but their time is very limited. And so actually sort of taking them and making them a sort of bot in the beginning who can give feedback
So
and help people get earlier view from the CMO and sort of see things more from the CMO's point of view is actually like a really powerful and simple use case that one puts CMOs out there, right, and puts them at the head of this thing, and two, just like sort of sets up that feedback over generation thing, which I think is
So
going to be
quick
helpful.
shout out just to you. What is that Noah also built a virtual an AI driven CMO that was an enormous amount of fun to engage with. And actually, I think at one point asked them to like whip off a media plan or something, and it was pretty great.
Yeah.
It was like a relatively sophisticated,
But it doesn't need to be a generic CMO. Like make it the very specific.
like
Like
the
again,
exact one for your org.
yeah, make it that person
Yeah.
with all the backing data. They have lots of comments from documents. You can take all this stuff, you can build out, and it's like that's really powerful actually because like a lot of people want that person's attention. And again, like the infinitely patient version of that CMO who has infinite time to parallelize their feedback for everybody in the marketing org it's a powerful additional tool.
The Yeah, I don't want to go wormhole too much in specific things, but it also thinks. I mean, one thing I find really interesting is just generating personas, and and being able to do market research.
Yeah.
I mean, it's definitely a use case that I have found quite surprisingly just surprising, I guess. I mean, when you engage, we're early enough in this that when it works, it is always like
Yeah,
whoa.
it's magical.
Um, Behind closed doors, what do you think CMOs are talking about with AI?
Behind
I
closed
mean,
doors?
yeah,
Not
right.
talking
Like, I
about
mean, it's like a thing where everyone's performing. There's so
it.
much
Behind
like
closed doors, they're not talking about it. That's the problem.
that's great.
I mean, when I did my conference earlier this year, and we had the CMO of KPMG speak, I think she said something to the effect of like, the most important thing you can do as a CMO is like just show your org you're actually using it. And it's just like it's sort of sad the number of CMOs who are trying to push AI to their organizations without engaging with it in a real way. And I think like I actually don't think this is going to be a sort of marketing transformation that's going to be led from the top down because I think like most transformative things don't end up getting led that way, right? Like it's sort of much more frequently happens organically, but you know this is hugely important. I think most CMOs would tell you that there's a lot of pressure from CEOs
Hmm.
to be thinking about this and like don't just pass it off. Like really get your hands dirty. I mean, this is you and I have talked about this, but it's like I think this is the most counterintuitive bit of technology that any of us have ever lived through. We've
Hmm.
literally like spent our lives and careers interacting with computers, and these kind of work the opposite. And I think like you're only going to get there if you sort of have that finger feel. Plus, just it's just a bad look, right? Like to
Yeah.
sort of be telling your organization something is really important and not be engaged with it.
Yeah, and I mean it's like, and again, there's something that that we have, that definitely habit, right? I mean, it's very hard to build habit, and yet most good work is born of habit in some way or another. Um, Last question: what do you think next? What happens next? So we're focusing a little bit on where we are right now, which I think which is what this report is all about: the state of the B2B CMO today. But with a little bit of future casting, not in 50 years, but in the next few years, what do you, how would you describe what you think will happen next?
Well, I think first, like, it's all going to happen a little slower than we think, because I think that's just sort of how large
Always.
enterprises function, right? So, I think what's strange about this technology is that it works so well right now, and I think like we actually are, we're used to sort of the hype cycle where something reaches the top of the hype cycle, and generally it falls because it's not really capable of living up to that hype. And I think actually, like right now, AI is. I think it makes it a pretty unique bit of technology. Um, I think my biggest thing is I've been thinking about this 10x marketer thing. I think that's a real big shift. Is like the idea of, we've been talking about 10x engineers in technology organizations forever. They're real. I've seen it. I had an engineering team, and there was a small group of people who produced significantly more output and value for the organization than everybody else. I think that's true in every part of the organization. But if you're not an engineer, you are always sort of like, you're always a little hamstrung by in what you could do. You were sort of you didn't have code to sort of
Yeah.
amplify what you could do, and I think now with AI, you're going to start to see those people who can operate those same kinds of people who can operate. And so one, I think on the high end, making sure you have like real amazing people on the high end of the
Yep.
organization, right? Like, you know, um, and then two, I think, it's going to be real questions about sort of what happens to the rest of the organization. And, on one hand, I think, we have a lot of evidence from history that, we tend to find more work for people, not less. But, I think we have to wait to sort of see how that plays out. But, I think the most important thing would be I do think we're going to see just these people who are incredibly talented who find ways to harness this stuff, and you're just going to start to see their ability to produce explode, and it's just going to be sort of a sight to see. And I don't know what that's going to mean exactly or how it's going to change. I think certainly in B2B, one really obvious thing that's going to happen is we're just like the noise is going to continue to increase, right? Because like, the cost of producing average output has gone to zero now,
Right.
essentially.
Right. Right. Right.
So, like, um, I think a lot of, sadly, what many B2B organizations relied on, which was just sort of like spray and pray and no real
Hmm.
sort of quality bars or anything else, like that just costs nothing now, right? So, I think it's fairly easy to see that that won't work. I don't think it was all that effective before, and it'll be even less effective now.
Right. Right. Right.
Um,
Right.
so yeah, I mean, those are a couple of things, but also like, it's just so hard to know. It's like the kind of classic thing
Yeah, like what are the
where
black swan things that will come out of this, right? That we just can't predict in any way, shape, or form. Who knows? And I tend to agree with you. Those are the things that we'll look back on. All of the things we're predicting that are, are not the things that we'll look back on as what, at how
yeah,
this
totally.
technology
Yeah,
affected the world. It will be the unexpected thing that it's like, oh.
yeah.